Hey there guys! There's nothing I enjoy more than discussing our childhood cartoons, and in today's video I wanted to talk about Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Courage the Cowardly Dog Show!
If you remember correctly, you'll know that Courage the Cowardly Dog was abandoned as a pup and found by Muriel, who lives in the middle of nowhere with her husband, Eustace Bagg. Courage and his terrifying battle to keep his family safe from evil monsters that seem to only plague the middle of nowhere has always been so enjoyable to watch, despite its dark undertones. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about a theory that involves all of the monsters that Courage sees throughout the show. They're all figments of his imagination, and be sure to stick around till the end to find out why the show takes place in the middle of nowhere to begin with. As anyone who has seen the series will know, Courage the Cowardly Dog Show is really strange to say the least. Throughout the show, we get to watch Courage, a dog who doesn't quite live up to his name until his family is put in peril. Courage spends most of his days being tormented by monsters, aliens, cryptids, and downright terrifying people that somehow always seem to find themselves on Courage's farm in the middle of nowhere. We don't quite know whether these monsters are trying to actually cause him and his owners harm, or if they are simply misunderstood. Courage always feels the need to stand up for and protect his owners rightfully, and despite being less than courageous, as we well know, he always manages to find it in himself to jump headfirst into harm's way to protect his dear old Muriel and her god-awful husband.
Stupid dog!
One of the many questions that fans of the series often find themselves asking whenever they are watching the show is, why do all of these strange things happen specifically to Courage, Muriel, and Eustace? I mean, there is seemingly no explanation as to why all of these terrifying creatures and paranormal phenomena keep finding their way onto their farm somehow. But in fact, there is an explanation. Thanks to the fan theory community, we actually think that we've found a solid explanation as to why all of this crazy stuff is happening. The theory was created by a Reddit user. The Redditor explained that everything that we saw happened in the series was actually from the perspective of Courage, meaning that we saw the world as he was seeing it. And you have to remember, he's a very small and cowardly dog, whose fear would likely drive his imagination to see the world and the people in it as terrifying monsters who are wanting to cause nothing but harm to him and his family. When in reality, almost none of what we saw was actually going on. And I know this might seem a bit far-fetched, but when you look at the evidence, the theory is a super solid one that this show itself almost directly backs up. I mean, you don't even have to look past the intro.
We interrupt this program to
When you take a look at the intro for Courage the Cowardly Dog Show, one of the first things that Courage gets fearful of is his very own shadow, which, after staring at for a second, no longer looks like a shadow. Instead, it transformed into some sort of monstrous creature that then proceeded to scare the life out of the pink puppy. This shows us that not only is Courage literally afraid of his own shadow, but if you take into consideration that it was, in fact, just his shadow, then you'll see that he has a very active imagination that tends to haunt him continuously. And considering the fact that we're seeing the world as he is imagining it to be, then surely the show is animated from his perspective, and his mind simply over-exaggerates the things that terrify him. For the end of the intro, we also get a glimpse of how Courage can sometimes perceive even his owner. At the end of the intro, we see Eustace, the aggressively mean husband of beloved Muriel. And as usual, Eustace doesn't have time for Courage, and he takes his rage out on the poor dog by calling him a stupid dog. He then proceeds to turn into a terrifying goblin-looking monster and spooks Courage. This seems to prove that Courage can and likely would perceive anyone that he might think of as a threat as a real-life monster. And I know what you're thinking too, but Eustace is clearly wearing a mask. We see him take it off after he scares Courage with it. Well, what if I told you that the mask was just how Courage's mind was connecting the fact that the monster could suddenly turn back into Eustace, that he knew as his owner? We never stop to ask how he is able to instantly pull a giant mask out of nowhere to scare the dog with. What seems more likely is that whenever Eustace would get angry and begin yelling at Courage, Courage would begin to perceive him as a giant, scary monster. And then once he realized it was just Eustace, it was as if he was removing his scary mask. This fearful imagination is what also led Courage into seeing normal people as horrifying and wicked monsters who were out to hurt his family, when in reality most of the enemies that he interacted with were simply just humans, just like his owners. They did not mean them any harm whatsoever. One thing that separated Courage the Cowardly Dog Show from almost any other cartoon on TV at the time was its terrifying and crazily animated villains, who were always around the paranoid Courage. Whether it be a chicken from outer space or cavalry of ghost warriors, who only come out when the windmill stops. There was no shortage of unique antagonists to make each episode of Courage the most interesting and entertaining show to watch at the time. And the one thing that I could never seem to understand was why Muriel and Eustace never seemed concerned about their own safety when there were things that could visibly be described as monsters visiting their homes so often. Well, if the antagonists in the show were only monsters because that's how Courage was perceiving them, it would make sense that Eustace and Muriel weren't as on guard as you would expect them to be. In reality, it was most likely just normal people visiting with them. Courage was simply a dog being protective of his owners. This could be due to the fact that Courage is a small-sized dog, and therefore is more likely to fear humans that he doesn't know, as they are much larger than he is. I think this theory makes a whole lot of sense even for some of the best villains that Courage had to face. For instance, the snowman that Courage has to save his family from on more than one occasion. So Courage might have viewed the situation as an evil snowman that is trying to preserve himself by capturing Muriel and Eustace so that he could harvest an anti-melting gene that is only found in humans. In reality, it is probably just a snowman. It most likely snowed in nowhere, something that Courage could have viewed as new and terrifying, and at the sight of a humanoid snowman he freaked. His mind told him that the enemy was there, and it came in the form of a snowman.
The new frozen home, where I can keep cool, thanks to my ingenious invention.
Another example would be the evil and cruel veterinarian. That one practically writes itself. I don't know a single dog that is not scared of going to the vet or mentioning one. And with Courage's active imagination, a simple visit to the vet would be a visit to a house of horrors. To make things a bit sadder, you might remember that Courage blames the cruel veterinarian for taking his parents from him and sending them off into space. Well, that could have been rooted in reality as well. There is a likely chance that Courage's mother gave birth to the litter of puppies and its owner didn't want any of them, so she left them all at the vet. And to protect himself from the trauma of being abandoned, he instead began to imagine that the evil vet had taken them away from him, and that it was all the vet's fault, when actually, it was likely the fault of whoever owned Courage's parents. Almost every villain that we've ever seen throughout the series could be explained as being human or simply inanimate objects that scared the poor dog. All it would take is for Courage to have had an active imagination, which, as I said before, we saw in the intro to the show in every episode. Another question that could be answered by this very same theory is why do Muriel and Eustace choose to live in the middle of nowhere, a seemingly barren wasteland with their dog Courage? Well, according to the show, the farm that the family lives on is located in a town known as Nowhere, Kansas, and it's a fictional town made up specifically for the show. But just because the town's name is Nowhere, doesn't really mean that there is actually nothing around. That just happens to be the name of the town that Courage calls his home. You might be wondering how we could possibly explain the fact that when Courage goes outside, or when they show the farm from the windows inside of the house, it looks like there is absolutely nothing around. Well, when you consider the age of his owners and the fact that they likely don't go many places throughout the day, Courage's world was likely really small. So even though Courage thoroughly believes that he lives in the middle of nowhere, it only appears that way to him because he doesn't get to see much outside of his house and yard. It's not likely that he would be going on walks around his neighborhood often. He's likely just let outside to roam the small plot of land and then called back inside. This isn't to say that Courage and his family don't go to bigger places though. There are indeed a few episodes where the family ends up going on a trip that takes them to various places around the world. For instance, they go to New York City, Paris, and Sweden in a single episode titled The Quack's Balloon. That episode also provides the perfect example of how Courage's mind distorts the world around him. When he travels to New York, you can tell right away that something looks off. The city and the state are seen from a different perspective, which is likely the way that Courage was actually seeing it. So who's to say that this isn't what's happening with the farm, and he just thinks they are literally in the middle of nowhere, when in reality, they live in the middle of a town called Nowhere that actually has a small population. It's hard to ignore all of the evidence when you really look at it. The idea that all of what we saw on the show was actually just being shown to us in the way that Courage was perceiving it, rather than what was really going on as a theory that can have a really big impact on how some people may view the show. But I think all of the evidence that backs it up gives it a lot of validity. What about you guys? Do you think there's any truth to the theory? Or do you think that Courage truly does face dark enemies on a near daily basis? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you guys, but I'll catch you next time.